Well, good morning and welcome. I am coming from my backyard as we're going to go back to the future. And the destination I have arrived at right now is a nice green spot in my backyard. And I want to reflect on the past and what the future will be, and that complicated subject of what's the meaning of life and where do I fit into all of it. So that's why I am back here. Plus, also the fact that it's cooler in the shade and all that good stuff. So, I am Brian Link. This is the Lake Christian channel, and we've been doing some drive-through Bible. I've only done the first 2 episodes. Kind of taking a pause. Partly my busy work schedule and just being tired in general, all that good stuff, but I wanted to get back to it. Want to do another video. This one I'm going to call Funding the Future 101, and I want to talk to you about what I've done in the past and what I'm hoping to do in the future, and just some general comments and thoughts on why we live our lives. Now, when I'm not doing YouTube and when I'm not working my real job, I like watching, drama shows and sitcoms and all that good stuff too. But I enjoy watching YouTube and I enjoy listening to talk radio. I like to hear conversation about what's going on, why people believe what they believe. I like to learn about history and business and science, and in particular, because I like the idea of owning radio stations and being a media company, I watch some of this stuff on history, but business history in particular, and then I also watch media and entertainment company news. I mean, there's a lot about Disney and will it be sold to Apple, and will it have enough money to buy Hulu and all those things. And there are people who are critics of some of the content that's been put out by the big studios, including Disney and others. And maybe I'm a strange duck, but like Miss Marvel, I thought it was actually a pretty good show. I'm sure there's probably a few woke elements in there, but it wasn't so overwhelming. I thought it was just a good show. This kid wants to be a superhero, and she ends up becoming a superhero. She likes a role model of hers, and, anyways, I think had the Marvel with the adult Carol Danvers character, and that movie being woke and being not liked, maybe Miss Marvel would have done better. Anyways, total squirrel. But so I watch commentaries on how shows are done, why they're done, because at some point, I've talked to you in the RWNB ear opening and the RWNB Jovial about some of the shows I hope to do, and I do want to develop that more on this channel and talk about some of the things. But I'm 46 now, and I'm getting older. And last night on YouTube, watched some things. One was about the timelines of Star Trek and how they intersect, and was the original series versus the show Enterprise that was the year 2000 2004, I believe. Their timelines differed, and now there's a new timeline, and was there a timeline that was different for this and that. And in the Strange New Worlds, they have the tomorrow and tomorrow after, or whatever it's called, and Captain Kirk from an alternate reality travels back with Miss Noonan's son, the security officer on Enterprise. This is predating Kirk. So it gets complicated with all the time jumping, but and they reveal that there's been interference by the Romulans in Earth growing and moving forward, and trying to delay or stop the Federation from ever forming. And in this video about the timelines, it talks about, this the Augment War was supposed to happen from 92 to 96 in the original series, and that's been upped, and it's been explained away on Strange New Worlds by the Romulans and messing with time, and even Enterprise back in 2000 got into the temporal wars and how things have changed and whatnot. And to some degree, when you're writing a story, and the original series was on, I believe, was 1962 to 65. There's 3 seasons. I could have the years off a little bit, but so obviously 1992 was 25, 30 years into the future, and it was okay to make a prediction about 30 years in the future. I mean, right now, here in 2023, we have, we have what we have. And, Back to the Future movie that I referenced when opening up, because I'm in the backyard, silly pun, anyways, but, they had all these predictions about 2015 back in 1985. The flying cars. I mean, we're 8 years past that future date, and we still don't have flying cars. Now, I guess technology technically exists, but the cost and the regulations and all that prohibit that from mainstream adoption, etc. So, talking about the future and all these predictions, well, with Star Trek, because we are past a lot of the dates when World War III was supposed to happen and all these things, you got to kind of rewrite canon at some point. Now, okay. I could really go down the geek rabbit hole with things like that, so I'm going to try to focus on my point today. Funding the future. What is the purpose of our life? As a Christian, I'm doing this online Bible reading, Bible study type of videos. I call the channel Lake Christian. Clearly, I believe that God has a purpose for all of our lives, and that we are all human beings. We are all made in His image. We all have a purpose. Some are greater than others. I grant you that. And but we're here to enjoy our life. But there's also a purpose to our life, and sometimes that can be hard to find. As I say, I'm 46. I don't know what success I'm going to have in business in the years to come, but it's been a rocky road getting to this point. I thought by now I'd have a family, a successful business, and just the fact, I don't know if I'm going to live 5 years or 50 years. 50 years, I'd be 96, and I guess that wouldn't be a bad run. It'd be nice to be 103 or 108 or, whatever. Assuming I can live as long, as healthy as possible, that'd be great. But the reality is my time on this earth is probably somewhere around the halfway point, if not past the halfway point. And it's like, okay, all the things I thought of when I was 20 that I would like to do, and maybe it would take 20 years to build up. Now, if I start them when I'm in my 40s, I'll be in my 60s by the time they build up. And what kind of legacy will I leave? And you think about history. I watched some videos about England and what happened to the Anglo-Saxons, and another video about the lost kingdoms and countries of Europe. And that's interesting, because history, the bad things that happen, I believe, sometimes happen for a reason. There's actually a book called Saving Hitler, and I had kind of a similar concept to it, and I didn't realize this book already existed. Maybe I heard it somewhere and just forgot, and it was a subconscious thing. But, I thought about, what if Hitler was stopped when he was a baby? And because if you look at the time frame in which he was born and when he rose to power and all that, I mean, Little House on the Prairie and the TV show takes a departure from the reality of Laura Ingalls and where they actually lived and some of the details. But I mean, it's pretty good historical fiction about a real history. I mean, this person was born somewhere in around 1860 and died somewhere in about 1960. So in the course of her 80, 90 years or whatever on Earth, she saw a lot of change. And I'm trying to focus here and not squirrel too much, but you know, in her era, I believe Hitler was born right around not too long after she was born. If she was born in like 1865 or so, and I believe Hitler was born in like, 1880 or so, because, by the time he rose to power, I don't know. I'd have to look back, but that's not the point. The point is what if, we were able to go back on time travel and kidnap little baby Adolf and bring him over to Minnesota, don't you know, and have him raised by the Ingalls for sure, don't you know, you betcha. He would have been a good Norwegian little boy, don't you know, by now for sure, in America, yeah. But, that obviously didn't happen. But if we would have done that, what would be the effect? If we never had World War II, if he never experienced World War I, how would the alternate timeline created be different? Now, I'm not saying what Hitler did was good. I think it was horrible. I wish it never happened. However, it did happen. And if it didn't happen, what people would be alive today that weren't alive, that would have been otherwise alive, that are not? What is the ramifications as far as, would there have been another dictator that rose up? What would have been the Soviet Union had Hitler not been around? Had there been, we built up this military machine that is the United States and the U.S. Navy and the world shipping lanes and all this stuff because of World War I and World War II. And basically we were the only ones left standing after, the European powers were pretty much decimated in World War II. So all of that history has a purpose. And I think we should learn from history, but we also need to understand that, the seasons of life, there's a book, and again, like I said, I'm not good at all these references and whatnot, but it talks about the different seasons, how, we have a spring, a winter, or a spring, a summer, a fall, and a winter, and, good men bring, good times, but good times bring bad men who bring bad times, and there's a cycle and all that. And I think we're probably in the autumn or winter, and there's probably going to be some worse times to come, but there's going to be a spring. And I don't know when Jesus is coming back and when the world is going to end and all of that. I don't think it's good for Christians to not focus on that, but I think dwelling on something you can't control is not beneficial. So, funding the future. I've mentioned in another video that I once had a website. I no longer have. Fundingthefuture.com. And that was actually part of a slogan that I used for my Bank 4, F-O-R-E, like Gulf 4. And, when I started my first sub shop, actually, I had the notion of having a corporation that would help fund people to open franchises. And, I've always had all these ideas about, how I would do different business differently and whatnot. And one of the overarching things that the Funding the Future was basically a blog that I had. It was an HTML website, and I learned all the HTML. Was basically pretty simple. I thought, business ethics are important, and we need more small business. We need more families to be financially free, and you can say, well, people spend too much, they're keeping up with the Joneses, they're making bad decisions, etc. And there is truth to that. But there's also truth to the way the economic situation is today and the regulations and all that. It's harder and harder to start a business. I can give you some examples in my life. I looked at doing a pizza place recently, and buy an existing one and whatnot. And I kind of knew this before, but I was reminded of it, and I just didn't have the funding and the help to buy the pizza place I wanted to buy. But it was something that I looked into, and I wanted to get like a kitchen going where I could maybe sell the pizza from this pizza place at gas stations. Well, one of the problems with that, why a lot of these little pizza and other types of places don't, is because there's laws in a place where you already have to follow all these health department guidelines, and you have to be certified, and depending upon what state, what county, and maybe some other factors, and it may even come down to which inspectors you get. Some are going to be more by the book than others. I don't know. But the problem is you got to get your restaurant certified. Well, if you want, and you can even do catering and all that, but if you want to sell your food in a secondary location without a kitchen, such as selling pizza slices in a gas station, you have to go through the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, and you have to have an inspector on site, and you have to have all these other regulations you have to follow, which are more onerous than and we can argue about should we have all these food laws or not, but let's just, for sake of argument, say, okay, they're a good thing. But then there's this other level you have to do, and you have to actually pay somebody to be on your site while you're making this food for a gas station. And there's no way you can do that in scale. And so I don't think that's reasonable. Now, maybe I am very libertarian, free market, and I think, whatever a business wants to do, it should do for the most part. And I'm going to kind of contradict that here in a few minutes. But I believe generally in the free market. And it's like, I think at minimum, a small business should be able to, as long as they're following, safety standards. And if they're already approved by the health department and already doing things safely, legally, why should they not be able to make food that's served in the gas station as long as everything is done properly, safely, etc.? Well, you can't. Another law that affects small business is the tax code. I've been trying to start a flea market for some time, and there's rules often. Again, this all depends your city and state, but they're all give or take. There's going to be pros and cons no matter where you go. Some jurisdictions better than others, but to do an outdoor flea market, some cities just don't allow it, or they make the rules you can't have it that often, or you got to pay certain fees. If you're inside, generally a lot of the cities and states, counties, whatever, they allow businesses inside to subdivide and do. I mean, you can have an indoor flea market much easier than an outdoor flea market. The problem is it costs more to get an indoor flea market because then you got to get a building. And another fee that's created by the government is the fact that with taxes, building owners can write off their empty buildings. And one of the reasons why it's hard for me to go in, because I don't have a lot of money, probably never will, to find a building, is if I go in and I rent, let's just keep simple numbers. Let's say a building, the size I need is $10,000 a month. Well, if I sign a 5-year lease at $10,000 a month, that's $120,000 a year that I am signing up for. And 120,000 times 5 is 600,000. So if I start and I'm not able to come on, I don't have means with my job or anything that I do or own. Maybe I could save up and pay 1 month worth of rent. But if I don't have enough business on month 2 and 3, and I don't have a lenient landlord, I'm done before I even got started. And I am legally obligated by a lease to fulfill, unless they can find another tenant. And if you're talking about a building that's been open for a while, that may not be easy to do. And it also depends upon, are they going to sue you? Are they not? Are they just going to let it slide? Those are a lot of ifs and maybes. And I've been in business. I know what it's like to deal with some of those things. it's tricky to traverse, to say the least. So if you have an empty building and you are renting it out for $10,000 a year, one, there is a risk that you let some little fly-by-night guy like this Brian Link character come and rent your building. Well, what if he damages it? What if his tenants or his customers damage it? So I get that. There's some risk there. There's some insurance liability things. I get all of that. But if they were to rent it out to me for $1,000 a month, because something is better than nothing, they lose their tax write-off. So let's just say I had enough money in my bank / ability to work and earn money. So even if I signed a 5-year lease and didn't get enough customers to make a go of it, I could probably, it'd be hard to do, but I could probably pay $1,000 a month with no customers and keep the place open, assuming that was my only expense. It gets more complicated than that, but just work with me here. But I can't do 10,000. So, but then they lose 9,000. 9,000 times 10 is 90,000. So, the amount they could write off from their taxes prevents them from wanting to rent out to anybody. Now, there's like those Halloween stores that pop up, but they have short-term leases. Now, there is some possibility there in short-term leases, but to build a flea market and a more permanent location, that's again hard. So I could go on about a lot of things, but I'm trying to get to a particular point. Look, you got a problem where it's hard for people to get into business, even in the restaurant business. I've looked at different things, and oftentimes the rent in a restaurant, just the building with little to no equipment in it, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month. And most people, myself included, cannot afford that unless the business is doing good. Then, you got to buy equipment, and because of the food safety regulations that pretty much wherever you go in the country, there's going to be some of them. You can't just have normal kitchen stove and refrigerator and kitchen cupboards. You have to have special restaurant grade. Again, this varies based on location, what they do and do not enforce, etc. But, so, if you're buying, let's say, a stove at, appliance store number 1, the big appliance store, the appliance box store, you can probably buy a stove for, realistically $1,000, but maybe a cheaper one for $700, whatever. If you buy a stove from a restaurant company, now it gets a little complicated to what type of stove, etc., but you're probably going to spend at least 3 times. The same with refrigerators. If you could get a good refrigerator for $1,000 or so, to get something equivalent at a restaurant, it's probably going to be $3,000 or so. It's been a long time since I bought this equipment, so the numbers, I'm probably off on that. But I know from when I did it years ago that the costs were significantly higher. And the problem is, once you buy that equipment, it is quickly devalued because there's a high failure rate in restaurants. So, Funding the Future was about, business ethics. I do believe that the government there should be maybe even a constitutional amendment, both at the state level and at the federal level, and there should be a whole series of laws where small businesses have more leeway and the bigger businesses have more regulations and more taxes. In a perfect world, I would like to see most of the taxes and regulations just simply done away with. That's probably not a practical thing right away. So, I would like to see where there's, let's say for sake of argument, a business that makes less than $100,000 a year in gross revenue should not have to pay any taxes or deal with any regulations. Now, maybe, because I'm a Christian, I don't believe in strip clubs, for instance. I think and even some bars and things of that nature that are not strip clubs are too rowdy, and you may not want that in your community. So I get there may still need to be some limits on laws and whatnot, for what is and is not allowed in the community, but there should be some flexibility for the new people starting out. And if you've got a business that's grossing $100,000 or less a year, realistically, that is just your income. And you got to consider that a business, now obviously this varies by business and how successful you are, et cetera, but some simple formulas. If you are going to sell a product, you need to first buy a product. You're going to need at least some employees to help move that product, sell that product, whatever. If you make improvements to it or whatever, restaurants I have a little more experience with. Now there's formulas and whatnot you can look up on the internet. I'm just going to make up an example. So if you want to sell a hamburger, say you're going to have a hamburger stand, and each hamburger, to buy the buns and the meat and the cheese and the lettuce and other condiments and napkins, it's probably going to cost you around, let's just say 65-70 cents, so roughly a third. And again, this is just an example. I'm sure you can tell me, oh, you're wrong, this is the actual price. It's probably higher than that. I'm just trying to give a simple example. So you get 30 or so percent of your cost is just simply buying the food. You need to pay employees, that's around 30%. You need to buy equipment and pay that off over time, that you're looking at 30%. If you're lucky, and this is a super simplified version, I get this, you might have 10% profit. And if you want to advertise or anything like that, or save up towards a future location, it's probably going to be less. So if you do all of these things and you spend all of this money to get a restaurant going, realistically, you're going to spend minimum $200,000, and that's probably assuming you can find a space that's already been a restaurant, you get some used equipment, and you get really lucky. Maybe you buy a place that's open that's, kind of on the decline, and you might get a reasonable deal. But if you're going to go out and pay for a space to be renovated, you're going to build a building, you're going to redo everything, you're going to buy all new equipment, and you're going to have an advertising budget and all right, you're talking probably more like $2 million. You get, I don't know, an Applebee's is probably the biggest national chain that would be the ideal example, but it doesn't matter what the chain is, but just think Applebee's. You've probably seen an Applebee's, you've probably been there, you probably ate. You can get a meal for, 10, 15, 20 bucks, and it's a pretty good meal, pretty filling for the most part. But for them to run that restaurant, it probably costs them about $3 million or so to get it built and operational, and they probably need to have at least $1 million in the bank to help fund its continuing operation in case it's slow, and they need money for advertising and whatnot. So you're talking minimum $4 million to get something like that going. If you're talking more like a Subway, which does not do as much cooking on like a big gas stove that needs the vents, and because they have a lot of stuff that's already pre-made, and a lot of the stuff that they use does not have the same process and expense and regulation, etc., it's cheaper to do a Subway. So if you can get an existing location, and it could be your own off-brand, like I did. I had a Submania, and I had a Beneath the Sea Sandwiches, both my names. Submania was actually a friend of mine. He came up with that particular name, but so they weren't like chains that already existed, but I was trying to build them into something. So you had that, and it's expensive to get going. It's expensive to start. So look, my point is simple. If you've got $100,000 a year in revenue and you have to spend $200,000 or more to get it going, you probably only get to keep maybe 5, 6, 7,000 of that per year. So you're not even replacing your job's income. So there should be some flexibility for people who want to start a business for like an experimental business license and less or no taxes, less or no regulations, and maybe a business that makes $1 million or more gross revenue has to follow more rules and regulations. And I'd even prefer, look, if I could be king for a day, snap my finger, what have you, I would say this: you should, if you're the government and you want people to be successful, you should have more freedom for people to start businesses and make it as cheap and as easy as possible. And I would say anything that $1 million or less in gross revenue should not be taxed. There should be basically no regulation of the business, as long as the business is legal in other ways, such as if your state allows, marijuana or whatever, that may be a different grouping of business. But your general retail, your general restaurant, gas station, pharmacy, whatever, and I realize there's rules with those businesses, but they should be as light and allow people. And with the food regulation laws, I think small businesses should be allowed to start with regular kitchen equipment. But again, squirrel, rabbit, but how do we do it? How do we make it so more people can get into business? And those are the things I've been thinking with the whole funding the future. And then if we're going to be in business, are we going to run it like every other company, or are we going to do things differently? Assuming we get in business and assuming we're successful, how are we going to treat our employees? There's an old saying in the restaurant business: if you have time to lean, you have time to clean. And while I do get that to a degree and I understand the logic, we're human beings and we need people there. And I think it'd be better to get people focused on a particular job. So don't have people running around with their heads cut off trying to cover every job. Now, I grant, when you're a small business or you're not making a lot of money, even if you're a bigger business, you can't just spend money endlessly. You have to have a plan, profit and loss statements, some goals. I get that. But I'm saying, how do you treat your employees? How do you interact? How do you treat your customers? Are you trying to squeeze every dime out of them? All those things I asked on Funding the Future in the past and more. And I'd like to get more into that. If you're curious, the Wayback Machine on archive.org, you could type in Funding the Future, and I know at least most of my material shows up. I thought about re-grabbing some of that information and putting it on a newer I probably wouldn't do fundingthefuture.com anymore because I got so many websites and it just gets expensive to hold on to it. And then the stupid HTTP secure certificates that are required these days because of the browsers and whatnot. Anyway, so it's hard to get into business. So when it comes to, and this video is going way longer than I had hoped, but when it comes to what's your purpose in life and the whole Christian thing and why are we here, I mean, there's more questions I want to answer in those regards, but in order to make this video not super long and rambly, I'm just going to say this. I believe we are here for a reason. I believe that the world can be a better place. I think as Christians, when we can change stuff and help people, we should. And I think we should try to help get more people financially free through business. Now, not everybody wants to be in business. Not everybody deserves to be in business, and some things would fail. And I get that. But those are some of the things that I've been thinking about, and how do we change the laws and the structure and, some of the other things I would like to discuss in the future, either on, one of the Funding the Future videos that I'm going to be doing more of, or in other, just general Lake Christian discussion videos, is, what is the role of woman in society? And I know this is potentially a hot topic. Women and men, we're both human beings. We're like opposite sides of a coin. There are pros and cons to each of us. I believe God made us, has, we fit together. And I'm not talking in the sexual adult fashion. I'm talking in the emotional spirituality, what we like, what we don't. And I think really every person, but since women historically have been those who have been more subjugated, and sometimes I think there's more to the story than just simply what the current woke crowd tries to tell you. But again, that's another video. But so if you are alive and you are a woman, is your only task to make babies, or are you supposed to use your brains and your intelligence for something else? I would say certainly you're supposed to use your intelligence and your abilities for something else, but we need people to help grow the next generation. And that's where the whole small business thing comes into place. I think if we had more people owning or working for small businesses and less big businesses and more family businesses, we could maybe accomplish both of these things, where all people, male and female, can feel adequate in their work and what they're adding to society, and also have time for their friends and family. So those are things I want you to think about, and we'll talk more. And I'm going to be doing a Bible reading here pretty soon. So have a picnic, be always jovial, and we'll catch you on the flip side.